Port Arthur, Texas, August 19, 1979. It's late. The music is pumping at a popular spot called the Texas Disco, and the night is in full swing. But in the blink of an eye, the party turns into a scene of pure chaos. A massive fire erupts, tearing through the building with terrifying speed. Flames lick the walls, smoke chokes the air, and panic sets in. Patrons scramble for the exits, desperate to escape the inferno. Amid the chaos, two young women, friends named Judith and Brenda, are seen running out of the burning club, fleeing for their lives just like everyone else. But after that moment, they simply vanish. They disappear into the night, swallowed by the confusion and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. In the aftermath, as investigators sift through the charred remains of the disco, a headcount begins. 2 people are missing, Judith and Brenda. The initial assumption by law enforcement was straightforward, almost dismissive. Maybe they were just scared and decided to leave town without telling anyone. It was a chaotic night, after all. Or, a far grimmer possibility, perhaps their bodies were still inside the wreckage, burned so badly that they couldn't be identified. Weeks turned into months, and with no new leads, the disappearance of Judith and Brenda started to feel like it might never be solved. The fire at the Texas Disco was a local tragedy, but the 2 missing women were becoming a footnote, a lingering question mark in a town trying to move on. Their families were left in a state of agonizing uncertainty, holding on to hope but fearing the worst. The community whispered, wondering what could have happened to them. Did they really just run away? Or did something far more sinister happen in the shadows of that fiery night? The answer, it turned out, was much darker than anyone could have imagined, and it was waiting at the bottom of a murky river. For long months go by, the embers of the disco are cold, and the case of the missing women is growing colder by the day. Then, a local fisherman out on the Sabine River, a large waterway that snakes along the border of Texas and Louisiana, makes a startling discovery. His line snags on something big, something heavy, submerged deep beneath the surface. He alerts the authorities, and when the recovery team pulls the object from the water, the mystery of Judith and Brenda takes a chilling and definitive turn. It's a car. And when they pry open the trunk, the search is finally over. Inside are the remains of the 2 young women. This discovery changed everything. This was no longer a missing persons case. This was a double murder. The details surrounding the car only deepened the mystery. First, the vehicle wasn't registered to Judith, Brenda, or anyone they knew. It was a ghost car, with no clear connection to the victims. Second, the car itself was found in an almost pristine state, considering it had been underwater. The doors were locked, and all the windows were rolled up tight. The gear shift was in park. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately put that car in the river. It was placed there to hide a terrible secret. The questions began to stack up immediately. Who owned this car? Who drove it into the Sabine River? And the most haunting question of all, how did Judith and Brenda end up in the trunk? Investigators were now faced with a complex and horrifying puzzle. They had the victims, they had the car, but the connection between the 2 and the fire at the disco was anything but clear. The night of the fire was re-examined, not as a tragic accident, but as a potential crime scene. Could the fire have been a diversion, a smokescreen, both literally and figuratively, designed to create chaos and provide cover for an abduction? If so, who would go to such extreme lengths? The police started to look at the patrons of the club that night, the employees, anyone who might have had a motive. But leads were scarce. Memories from that panicked night were fragmented and unreliable. It seemed like the killer had used the pandemonium of the fire to their absolute advantage, plucking 2 women from the crowd and disappearing without a trace. The focus shifted to the victims themselves. Judith and Brenda were just 2 normal young women out for a night of fun. They had no known enemies, no connections to criminal activity. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or were they? Could they have seen something they weren't supposed to see? Perhaps they overheard a conversation, or witnessed an act that made them a target. The fire itself was investigated for arson, and while it was deemed suspicious, no definitive proof could be found, and no perpetrator was ever charged. The 2 events, the fire and the murders, were undeniably linked by time and place, but the thread connecting them remained invisible, lost in the smoke and the murky water. The investigation was hitting a wall. The killer had been methodical, careful, and had left behind a trail that seemed to lead nowhere. Then came the autopsy report, and with it, the most bone-chilling detail of the entire case. The official cause of death for both Judith and Brenda was drowning. Let that sink in. They didn't die from smoke inhalation in the fire. They didn't have any other fatal injuries. They were alive when that car was pushed into the Sabine River. They were trapped in the trunk, in complete darkness, as the car sank beneath the water. It's an almost unimaginable horror. This finding completely changes the timeline of the crime. It means they were abducted from the disco, forced into the trunk of a car, and kept alive for some period of time before the car was driven to the river's edge. This horrifying detail opens up a whole new set of questions. Why keep them alive only to end their lives in such a brutal manner? Was the killer trying to extract information from them? Was it an act of prolonged sadistic cruelty? This wasn't a quick impulsive crime. It was calculated. The perpetrator went to great lengths to control the situation from start to finish. They started a fire in a public place to create a diversion, successfully abducted 2 people from the ensuing chaos, secured them in a vehicle, and then disposed of them in a way that was clearly meant to hide the evidence forever. This level of planning suggests a killer who was not only ruthless but also incredibly confident, perhaps even someone who believed they were untouchable. The fact that they drowned means there was a window of time between the abduction and the final act at the river. What happened during that time? Where were they taken? This missing piece of the timeline is a black hole in the center of the investigation, a period of terror for the victims that we can only guess at. With this new information, let's try to reconstruct a plausible theory. The killer, or killers, needed to abduct Judith and Brenda for a reason. Setting fire to a crowded nightclub is an extreme and risky act. You don't do that on a whim. It suggests the stakes were incredibly high. One popular theory is that the women accidentally witnessed another crime taking place at or near the disco. Perhaps it was a drug deal, an argument that was about to turn violent, or something else entirely that the perpetrators could not afford to have any witnesses to. In this scenario, the abduction would have been reactive. The fire, then, would have been a brilliant and ruthless improvisation. By setting the blaze, they created the perfect cover. In the ensuing panic, grabbing 2 people would be much easier, and their absence wouldn't be noticed for hours, maybe even days. Once they had Judith and Brenda, the clock was ticking. They needed to get them away from the scene and figure out what to do next. They drive them to a secluded location. The questioning begins. What did you see? Who did you tell? The women, terrified, likely had no idea what was happening. When the killers realized they couldn't risk letting them go, they made the decision to eliminate them permanently. The method placing them in the trunk and sinking the car was chosen for its concealability. They probably believed the car, and their secret, would never be found at the bottom of the Sabine River. This theory accounts for the fire as a diversion and provides a motive for the abduction. It paints a picture of criminals who were desperate and willing to escalate their actions from one crime to a far more heinous one in a single night. But there are other possibilities, equally dark. What if the fire wasn't a diversion for the abduction, but the abduction was the entire point, and the fire was simply a tool to facilitate it? This suggests the crime was personal. Perhaps someone at the disco had a grudge or an obsession with one or both of the women. This individual might have stalked them, waiting for an opportunity. The crowded, chaotic environment of a club on fire would be the perfect moment to strike. This person could have offered them a ride, pretending to be a good Samaritan, helping them escape the fire, only to trap them. In this scenario, the motive is much more personal and disturbing. It wasn't about silencing a witness to a separate crime. It was about possessing and ultimately destroying the victims themselves. This theory might explain the extreme cruelty of their final moments. It wasn't just about disposal. It was about terror. The unregistered car remains a key piece of the puzzle. It was likely a stolen vehicle, or a burner car, used specifically for the crime and meant to be untraceable. This points to a degree of criminal sophistication. Your average person doesn't just have an untraceable car ready to go. This suggests the killer had experience in covering their tracks. For decades, this case has remained frozen in time. The Port Arthur Police Department has revisited it over the years, looking at the evidence with fresh eyes and new technology, but the trail has always gone cold. The main suspects, if there ever were any, have never been publicly named. The case is a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Who owned the car? And most importantly, who is responsible for the deaths of Judith and Brenda? More than 40 years have passed. The Texas disco is long gone, and memories have faded. But for the families of Judith and Brenda, the pain never goes away. They are left with a story that has no ending, a wound that has never been allowed to heal. This case is a stark reminder that even the most meticulously planned crimes can leave behind tiny clues, and that sometimes, the truth lies waiting just beneath the surface. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that hot August night in 1979. They know who lit the match, who turned the key, and who watched as a car disappeared into the dark waters of the Sabine River. They held onto a secret for over 4 decades. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and it's never too late for justice. The story of Judith and Brenda is more than just a cold case. It's a plea for answers, a search for a truth that has been submerged for far too long. Thank you for watching. If you found this case as compelling as I did, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries.